So let's jump right in. So Otaku asks, do you think the number of new words learned today should be dictated by the number of hours a person can actively immerse? For instance, if you immerse 3 or less hours, limit it to 10 new words. If you can do 3 to 5 hours, then 10 to 15 new words. And for 6+ hours, then 10 to 20 new words. Recently, I've seen a lot of newer people trying to do 20 plus words a day, but only immersing an hour or so. Yeah, so I think that this is a question that doesn't have such a simple answer. I don't really think it's necessarily a matter of you're doing this many hours of immersion, therefore learn this many new words a day. Now, we can create kind of rules of thumb that take this format of, for this many hours learn this, but I'm going to try to explain my actual view of, in terms of actual efficiency, what is the mechanism between the relationship between how many new words you're learning per day and how many hours of immersion you're doing. So basically, I kind of think of it as there's different kind of strata of words or tiers of words. And one good way to conceptualize this could be the frequency star system that's included in the MIA dictionary add-on. So in case any people watching this don't know, inside of the MIA dictionary add-on, there is kind of a score given to each word you look up based off how frequent it is, or based off its position within a frequency list. And there's basically 5 levels. 6 technically if you count words that have 0 stars. So if a word is 5-star, that means that it's either one of the most 1,000 common words, or maybe it's one of the most 1,500 or 2,000 most common words. I don't remember exactly what the different boundaries between the different levels were, but it's something around there. And then if it's 4-star, that means that it's like in between 1,000 and then 3,000. And if it's 3-star, that means that it's like between 3,000 and something else. And I don't remember what the actual boundaries were. We did put a lot of thought into it when we were actually creating the system, and I can pull it up. It's somewhere. I probably should have done that before I started filming. But anyway, yeah, there's these tiers. And so then a 1-star word is extremely uncommon, and a 0-star word is like mega ultra uncommon. Like you might never come across that word again. So now, of course, the boundaries between these different tiers or levels is something that we just kind of made up based off of what we thought would be most useful. But I'm just using this as a conceptualization. So if you wanted to, really, you could think of it as there's 10 different levels or 100 different levels. Ultimately, where you draw the lines are arbitrary, but it's just this idea that there are these different strata of words. And each strata, so if we're assuming that the first strata contains the most common words, each strata contains more total words than the last, so your first 1,000 words unlock, a very high percentage of comprehension. You're not actually going to understand that much of the language, but just in terms of raw coverage, the most common 1,000 words can cover between like 70 and 90%, depending on what domain you're talking about, right? Whereas the next 2,000 words only give you like an extra 5 to 10% or something like that. Sorry if the exact numbers are off, but hopefully you get the main idea. And so we have these different tiers of words. And basically the way I think about it is that you want to be learning words that are on either the same tier or one tier above the kind of level that you've actually acquired. So, I talk a lot about the distinction between learning versus acquisition. And this is a really important concept when we're talking about learning words as well. So basically, there's going to be words that you have learned, meaning that you memorized, the reading and the meaning and the pronunciation, but you haven't actually acquired, meaning that when you actually hear the word, when you're listening to your immersion, it doesn't instantly register. You have to either it just goes over your head, or you have to think about it for like a second or two before it really clicks. And then there are words that you actually have acquired, where as soon as you hear it, you know it. You could, if you've acquired it deeply, then you can use it yourself naturally, and so on. And so basically, there's always going to be more words that you know than what you've acquired, because we're, based off the way I'm thinking about it, if you have acquired a word, then you automatically also know it. So you can't really have acquired a word but not know it, because if you've acquired a word, then if someone asked you what that word meant, you could just reflect upon your intuitive knowledge of the language and then give an answer, right? So I never officially learned like the word, I don't know, like gigantic in English, but I can tell you like, yeah, it means that something is very, very big, right? So anything that you've acquired, you technically also know. Just trying to get my definitions precise here. So yeah, basically there's always going to be words that you know but haven't acquired. And so basically, it's possible to acquire a word directly without learning it first, kind of like just through osmosis, through your immersion. But it's going to be a lot easier to acquire a word if you have learned it. And that's the whole point of using the SRS, right? You build all these mental dictionary entries, you learn all these words, and that, first of all, makes your immersion more comprehensible and also makes it easier to actually go on to acquire those words. I talked about that in my video, the role of the SRS. And so, pretty much, going back to that idea of the tiers, it's very hard to like acquire a word that is like more than one tier above the level that you've acquired. So let's say that on an acquisition level, you've pretty much completed all 5-star words. So for like the vast majority of 5-star words, when you hear them, you understand them. Then in that case, you're going to be very prime or very ripe to acquire 4-star words. They're going to be like just beyond your horizon. You're like, your brain is just going to be starting to hone in on these 4-star words, and you're going to start noticing them more often in your immersion. They're going to become more accessible, and it's just going to start being very natural for you to acquire them. But if you're still at that point where you've just kind of completed the 5-star word strata and you're moving on to the 4-star word strata, then at that point, it's going to be a lot harder for you to acquire 3-star words, because 3-star words are just kind of too far, like they're too infrequent for you to really get a grasp of them at your current level. When you're at a higher level, you can still acquire words that are used very infrequently because your brain gets comfortable enough with the language where, like, even if you only see a word once a month, every time you do come across that one word, your brain is actually able to connect it to the last time you saw it last month and then the time you saw it before that, and still work on putting together this bigger picture. But before you're really comfortable in a language, then you're only going to be able to acquire words that show up very frequently. And so basically, your capacity to acquire infrequently used words grows as your fundamental ability rises. And so that's because of this principle or phenomenon, you want to be working on words that are at your right level, meaning that they're like at the current like star score you're working at, or right at the above one. And because if it's too far above your current like actual baseline level of acquired ability, then like even if you memorize those words, you're not really going to be able to acquire them very naturally. So basically, what all of this is kind of like leading up to, hopefully this actually makes sense, because this is like kind of a concept I've only like articulated to myself, like in response to reading this question, but I think it makes a lot of sense if you actually get what I'm saying. So basically, let's say that you have a learner who they, like, in their case, just hypothetically, they have acquired all 5-star words, and they have knowledge of all 4-star words, and now they're spending time gaining knowledge of 3-star words, but they haven't yet acquired very many 4-star words. In this case, this person, it wouldn't be a very good use of this person's time to be focusing on memorizing 3-star words, because they still have this whole strata where they have knowledge, but they haven't acquired it yet. So to this person, knowledge of 3-star words isn't going to be very helpful because it's going to be too out of reach. What they really need is to just immerse more so that they can integrate all of the knowledge that they have of the 4-star words and fully acquire them. And then once they have acquired all those 4-star words, then they're going to be really primed to start acquiring 3-star words, in which case it's going to be a good use of that person's time to memorize the 3-star words. And so basically, there's one way to articulate this idea is that you don't want the gap between what you've acquired and what you know, or what you've acquired and what you only know, meaning you haven't acquired, you don't want it to get too big. Otherwise, you're going to be memorizing words that are basically too infrequent for you to realistically be able to integrate into your knowledge in the short-term future. And it's going to be a better use of your time to just be immersing. But the opposite could be true, right? Where basically you pretty much have acquired every word that you know, and so your vocabulary growth is very slow because you're pretty much only learning words through osmosis. In this case, you would want to kick up the number of words that you learn per day so that you actually are creating this buffer. You're kind of creating words that are words that are accessible to you, meaning that they're not so infrequent that you're not going to be able to integrate them. They're kind of just beyond whatever your current horizon is. And you want to be learning lots of those words to prime yourself to acquire them. And that's going to help you speed up your vocabulary growth. So basically, what really matters is the gap between what you've acquired and what you know but haven't acquired. And there's kind of like a sweet spot. And depending on your learning history, this is going to be different from person to person. So Like, if you're someone who historically has been a very heavy Anki user and haven't really done that much immersion, then chances are there is a lot of words that you know but haven't integrated yet. And so it's going to be a better use of someone who's in this position's time to just focus on immersion and not be learning as many words, because they're not yet at a baseline level of acquired ability where they're going to be able to integrate the words that they would be learning if they were like studying words, right? Because since they know so many words, if they were going to memorize more words, those words would be very infrequent, but those infrequent words that are not going to be accessible to that person to actually acquire. So yeah, to kind of bring this more into kind of more practical terms, I would say that, like, if you're starting fresh, then it kind of makes sense that you have to kind of create this buffer, because you're going to start off, you don't know any words, right? Which is why I kind of say, like, at the very beginning of the process, just sit down, memorize the most common 1,000 to 2,000 words, because now you're creating this buffer. And then from that point onward, I would say if you're doing probably between 1 and 3 hours of immersion per day, then yeah, 10 words would be a good amount to learn. And if you're doing between like 3 and 6 hours a day, then maybe somewhere around 20 words would be a good amount. And for most people, I wouldn't really recommend going over 20 words per day, just because if you consistently do more than 20 new cards a day in Anki, then your reviews are going to get really bulky. And for a lot of people, like, having to sit down and do Anki reviews for 2+ hours a day is just so mentally taxing that it's not sustainable. Whereas it is pretty sustainable to do like giant hours of immersion a day, because immersion can be anything, right? It can be reading a book that you like, watching a TV show that you like. And so it's a lot easier to do it in mass quantities. So I'd say, like, to a point, the number of new cards per day and the number of immersion you do kind of like scale alongside each other. But eventually you hit this point where it's just not really realistic or feasible to do more new words per day in Anki than you have been doing. And so your immersion just keeps scaling while your Anki kind of stays the same. And that's kind of like what I did, right? Like, for me, I always pretty much only did 10 to 15 words a day. There was lots of a lot of time where I was just doing 10 words a day, even though I was getting tons of immersion, and that ultimately worked out fine for me. So I would say you kind of have to learn to just gauge in your own experience how far ahead your kind of knowledge bank, your like loaded up knowledge bank that you haven't yet acquired, how big that has gotten. Because you start to get an intuition for, like, are the words that I'm learning in Anki like actually useful to me? Are there things that I'm actually seeing in my immersion and that I'm going on to acquire? If so, that means you're probably in the sweet spot. If you feel like your vocabulary growth overall is just really slow, then maybe you want to pick it up. And if you feel like you're learning things in Anki that you never really see in your immersion, then that probably means that your knowledge base has gotten a little too far ahead of your acquired ability, and you want to focus more on just immersion and getting your baseline level up, so that you like gain the capacity to actually acquire words from your immersion that are very infrequently used. So yeah, I hope that made sense. This is kind of an idea I don't think I've ever talked about before, because like I said, I kind of just kind of like came to it as I was thinking. But let me know if that makes sense. And yeah, I'll try to work on refining my explanation of this concept, because I think if I could explain it in a way that didn't take 12 minutes and or 14 minutes I'm at now, and could explain it more succinctly, then I think it's a really powerful idea, because I think it's better to actually understand, like, what is the actual mechanism behind new words per day for immersion. Like, what is actually happening here? Why is it good to do, for example, 10 new words a day if you have like 1 to 3 hours a day of active immersion? Like, where does that actually come from? Why is that the case? Rather than just having a kind of blind principle, I think it's good to kind of have this idea of, like, you're learning words that are just beyond your kind of like acquired horizon, because those are going to be accessible to you. And if you already have knowledge of all the words that you haven't yet that are like on your horizon but you haven't yet acquired, then learning more words means basically learning things that at your current level aren't really going to be useful to you, and you're not going to be able to integrate, which means it's better to instead just focus on integrating that next level, that next tier that you haven't yet integrated. So it's kind of just that balancing thing, but I'm pretty much just saying the same thing over and over now, so I'm going to move on.